Hello, everyone. This is Coach Matt for the Seattle Chess School. And today's video will be a little more instructional. We'll call it Take, Push, or Sit. This is a description of pawn tension. So when the pawns are attacking each other and it is our move, we have the options of taking, pushing, or sitting. Taking means that we remove it from the board. Pushing means we bypass it. Sitting means we do something other than taking or pushing, say such as knight to c3. Okay, now it would be really great to give a percentage on how often we should take, we should push, or we should sit. But the reality is that each position is totally different. So taking or pushing or sitting, you cannot add a numerical value to it. It's just simply a good move or it isn't. Now, with these options, you want to choose the options that are best for you or are bad for your opponent. For example, if we get a French defense, we will have pawn tension on move 2. So here the pawns are attacking each other and white gets all three options. You can take, you can push, you can sit. Now, against certain opponents, it might be actually a good move to push by because the specific opponent that you are playing might not be so good in closed positions. For the same reason, if you're playing someone who's playing the French defense and they're not so good in open positions, maybe you want to capture. So it can be, this decision can be made based on your opponent or based purely on what you prefer. Okay, now for those players that prefer the same option every single time, I refer to those players as 98ers. For example, for those of you at home who every time there is pawn tension, you always take, you are a 98er in the take gang, I guess we could call it. If you're like me when I was younger, and even now this still affects me, I'm a 98er in the push realm. Maybe not in this exact position, but generally speaking, I like to push pawns with pawn tension. And then there are those who are sitters 98% of the time, you know, and those kind of players would play knight to c3 or play knight to d2 and pass on this responsibility to the opponent. Okay, so with these three options, there are some advantages and there are some disadvantages. So for the takers, we'll go back to the French defense position here. For those of you that like to take 98% of the time, there is an advantage to exchanging pawns when you take, push, or sit, and that is you open up the position. This means that when both sides play pawn takes pawn, the position has, in this case, has opened up. We have an open E file. We have some diagonals that are more wide open for both sides. And this increases the possibilities for your back row pieces. And of course, every single time in a take, push, sit scenario where captures happens, the more the board opens up and the more that the big pieces can dance around and do all kinds of great things. The other advantage to capturing in take, push, sit is that you remove the responsibility of defending the pawn that was just attacked. Remember, in pawn tension situations, your opponent is always attacking the pawn. So this means that if you choose to capture, then you no longer have to worry about the defense of said pawn. So those are some advantages to taking. Now, maybe a couple of disadvantages to capturing is that it also opens up the position for the opponent. So even in this position, if you're a fan of capturing here because you don't like defending your e4 pawn, you have opened up the position for the opponent, most specifically the light square bishop, where one move ago, this thing was trapped in behind its own pawn. Once capturing happens, this frees the light square bishop for action. So the opponent's position also improves and also opens up a little bit. Another drawback to playing pawn takes pawn every single time there's pawn tension is that there's a potential for drying up the position, which means where there's too many exchanges and you're in an end game where possibly you have no winning chances and you have more drawing chances. This can happen when too many pawns get traded off. Okay, now some advantages to pushing. Pushing the pawn gets the pawn closer to queening. Now, of course, in this exact position, there's many obstacles in the way from this happening. So it's not likely that this is going to queen anytime soon, but possibly in the future. But it does get the pawn closer. It also takes up space. For example, anytime you push a pawn, you're taking away space, like knight f6 and bishop d6 are moves that can no longer be played. The other thing that it does is that it closes up the position. So, for example, in this position, with white to move, black has just played pawn to b3. And here we have pawn tension. Now, if the person that is playing white is a 98er in the taking realm, then capturing this pawn might actually just lead to an instant loss for white, because suddenly this rook is now looking at the king. We've got this pawn that is close, that is trapping the king. If this queen could somehow get to the A file and double up, then black would be playing for checkmate. So in this position, with pawn tension, what we want to do here is close up lines. So the correct move here would be to push, because this makes it so that the rook never reaches the king, and we have in effect a double shield here for the king. We've got the shield in the form of their own pawns, and we have the shield in the form of black's pawns, actually protecting the king quite nicely. So a couple drawbacks of pushing in take, push, sit is that sometimes the pawn that you push becomes overextended and becomes something of a target, something that your opponent is going to attack immediately or later. And sometimes if you push too much, then it will be hard to defend the advanced pawn. The other slight drawback to pushing is that it does take away the tension. Notice that one move prior, we are attacking the pawn on d5, but once we push by, there is no more capture on the pawn, which means that both sides can basically maneuver around without anything happening in the center of the board. One example of this that comes up in games is in the Queen's Gambit, where white will play an early c5. This pawn was actually attacking the center and is usually meant to keep the tension on this pawn, or perhaps capture it someday, so that white will end up having two center pawns to one. But when you push by, all the tension has been taken off of the pawn, and now black can develop rather smoothly without having anything to do worrying about his center pawns. Also, this pawn on c5 is also overextended and could possibly be hit with b6 right away, something to that effect. Okay, so sitting, one of the benefits to sitting is that it adds tension to the game. So, for example, an opening like the Réti system with c4, here we have pawn tension, and if black chooses to sit here, then white can also sit. So this is a type of thing where there might be some long-term sitting, and neither side is going to capture in either way. And so it adds some dynamism to the game, where you can actually have something that you can attack at some point, but you don't necessarily use up the attacking move right away. The other thing that sitting does is that it's non-committal. You're not committing your pawn structure, for like going back to the French defense here. Once you capture like this, you are committing the position to being a symmetrical pawn structure, 4 versus 4 on the queen's side, 3 versus 3 on the king's side, and the position is just this. If you choose to use sitting and use this pawn tension in your favor, this position could turn into all kinds of different things. Maybe later on we push, maybe later on we take anyway, maybe later on black is the one that captures and changes the position. So we actually add some dynamic possibilities, and the longer that we sit, the more the possibilities start to multiply. Now, some drawbacks to sitting is that you pass on these choices to your opponent. One position that I think is very interesting in the Scandinavian defense is knight to c3. Now, this is definitely a sitting move, and now black actually has all three options. Black can push by and attack the knight. Black can capture and open up the position, or black can sit with a move like, say, c6 and go into the Caro-Kann defense, or sit with a move like knight f6 and go into Aljokin's defense, or e6 and go into the French. So, but when you pass on these responsibilities to your opponent, they might actually find a move that is good for them and not for you, and so forth. So you're basically giving the opponent a chance to find a good move. I would also say that the only other slight drawback to sitting in take, push, sit is that the game does get more complicated. So this means there'll be more to calculate, more to think about, but some players actually like that type of thing. It gets the creative juices going in the brain and allows for imaginative thought and so forth, and it makes the game more exciting. All right, now one of the benefits to looking at pawn tension in this way is that you can study your own games from this point of view. And here we will take a look at some games where we can actually look at the pawn tension moments. That's all we will look at. We're not going to go too deep into the games, but you can also work with these moments with Stockfish here at leadchess.org. You can work on these moments with your coaches, and and try to improve this stage of your, this area of your game. All right. Okay, so the games that we are going to look at here are two of my favorite students. One is Timberlake 2025. The other is Pocket Thesaurus. And we will look at some of these games that they played recently from the point of view of pawn tension. Okay, so we will ignore tactics, we'll ignore opening theory, and all the other great parts of chess. We will just simply look at what happens when pawn attacks pawn, and it is one of their moves. Okay, so this first game here we will look at is from Timberlake. He is playing a 2179 player, and here we have pawn tension on move 3. And here, but it's pawn tension where it is black to move. So black actually took, and here white can capture with either piece. Timby takes with the knight. So black, in this situation, black chose with their pawn tension, they chose to just be a taker. And actually taking is probably black's best move in this opening anyway. So we have some developing moves. So we have opposite side castling. Here, black wants to go after the bishop, which is rejected. The knight is attacked and went to e5, and this allows Timby to play knight to f5 and attack d6 3 times. This pawn was lost. Now, one of the things about winning pawns as far as take, push, sit goes is that it actually reduces the chances of take, push, sit happening until way into the future, way into the end game. You could imagine like these 3 pawns coming in contact with these 3 pawns. A lot of moves are going to happen before that occurs, unless of course black goes on some sort of pawn storm. Same thing on this side of the board. If Timby goes for a pawn storm, then the pawns might get in a take, push, sit situation. But if they don't do that, then it's going to be a very, very long time. So nevertheless, both sides try to attack each other. Here, the bishop is going after the knight, and the queen is attacking a2. So Timby, of course, is always defense first. Give me the queen. No. And then here, black said, give me the queen. And Timby very bravely said, yeah, okay, go right ahead. So he's banking on all of these pieces, possibly this rook coming over here, to make checkmate before the loss of the queen is gonna matter. So anyway, so some things get exchanged like so. 92 check. Now this is an interesting move. I mean, it gives away the knight, but attacks a2. And now we have pawn tension. So it is Timby's move, and he gets the three options. Now here, two of those options are legal but bad. B4, the push option is bad because queen takes bishop. The capture option is bad for the same reason. So this means Timby should sit. And so leave the pawn tension here, and he finds rook to g1 as a sitting move. Now, this, of course, as sitting moves go, looks pretty nice. I mean, we suddenly have a double attack on g7. If this move is played, then this is pawn tension that Timby can take advantage of just by simply capturing. We've got another bishop pinning. This should lead to some sort of counterplay. In this position, which is really kind of interesting, is that now the take, push, sit responsibility was passed on to Black, and Black suddenly became a 98er and captured. Now we can see why this happened, because he's threatening mate, but it turns out that Timby's rook g7, king f8, rook f7 forced resigns, because if king to g8, rook to g1 is actually checkmate. So here was a case where pawn tension, this pawn tension led to a wrong decision. In fact, an incredibly wrong decision, because it led directly to checkmate. Okay, so here's game number 2. Timby is now Black against a 22-41 player. And here we have a Jobava London. Here we would expect that c5 would be some pawn tension. That looks natural and good at some point. Although I don't think that actually happened in this game. But here we have a case of pawn tension. Take, push, or sit. All right, now of these three options, let's see, if we capture, this might, after e takes f4, might actually give White a really strong outpost here on e5 that is somewhat difficult to get rid of. And even if you do get rid of it, it just gets replaced by a pawn, which will allow White to basically dominate the center of the board. Now, I would say the one benefit to this is that it does half open the G file, but it's an open question whether this is a good move or not. Pushing in this position does make sure that the knight can't get out to any third rank squares, although of course it could still be developed to e2. It does close up the position, which means that rook to g8, if needed, would be even more useless because the file is totally closed. So here in this position, Timby chose to sit, but he chose by capturing. And what was interesting about this capture is that it immediately took off the pawn tension. So now we don't get the three options anymore, and now we just get on with the game here. Here, g4 forced Black to fianchetto the knight. h4, pawn tension. So here, pushing is out. So all it is this taking or sitting. Now, sitting is kind of interesting because, in fact, I was going to say we were going to ignore tactics, but I guess I lied, because White did have the option of playing queen to b5, which was a fork tactic, which won the b7 pawn. So if Black is going to sit here, Black probably should make a move to make queen b5 not check. For example, a move like knight c6, or a move like pawn c6, or a move like a6. All these moves guard b5. And if we're worried about the pawn tension going against us, well, if White chose to capture, then we could capture with the queen, and the queen has some activity here over against the weakened king side. So we could sit like this. In this position, Timby took. And so this means we temporarily have a passed pawn, but now these pawns are doubled and isolated. And White, of course, goes immediately after them. And it turns out we can't even hold on to the H pawn. So Timby here, in order to get out of this predicament, decides to make more pawn tension. Now, this one is interesting because now White has all three options, but I would say that sitting is probably not good when Black is just going to capture if you do anything other than pushing or taking. So basically, White is limited now to actually capturing or pushing. So here he chose to push, which suddenly cuts off this pawn here from any protection whatsoever, but it does give knight f5, which happened. And now this knight is suddenly a little bit better than before. Castles, queen e7. Now queen e7 actually did finally guard against queen to b5, but it does not guard against knight takes d5, which was not found. Here, white decided to make some pawn tension of his own. So here we have take, push, or sit. Now pushing, of course, is out. If you're going to sit, then that means you have to move the knight. Any other sit move just allows pawn takes knight. And so this means, do we have a good square for this knight? I would say that knight g3 looks aggressive, but if white just simply captures, then the knight is kind of stranded out here. If the knight has to go backwards to g7, well, I mean, this knight is no longer good at all. So this means that capturing is probably forced. Now, but with this particular capture, white has done something really great with take, push, or sit. By playing the move e4 and forcing black to capture, pretty much, that means that this knight gets him to be improved dramatically. This knight suddenly has f6, c5. After Timby's next move, it's also been given d6, and through pawn tension, white has actually improved his knight, which is a really excellent and instructive way to handle this. Okay, so he decides to jump in, king to d8, so no more castling, collect the pawn on h4, exchange off, and this move finally developing pieces, and then we get into this heavy piece endgame. All right, so no pawn tension, maneuvering around, attacking the queen, centralizing, overprotecting d4 or protecting d4, gave a check, and then pawn tension. Here we go. So this move actually had a point to it, which was to threaten queen to a4, and also triple attack the pawn using take, push, or sit. So here it was white's turn, and white, with this take, push, or sit, actually chose to push, which I think is a mistake due to queen a4 check, and the combination of the rook and the queen against this exposed king should be decisive. At least there's going to be some giant attack on the king. So this was a case where take, push, or sit happened, but it was actually a mistake. Now here, this is also take, push, or sit. And here, of course, black should sit with queen a4 check, but unfortunately here, Timby took. So this is exactly what you would expect out of a 98er, where if they capture every single time, every once in a while, these captures are going to cost you. It's not always a good move. And so now white has take, push, or sit, or actually take or sit on d5. However, he chose this move, which actually is immediately decisive. Now, this creates pawn tension here and here, but the main thing is that it's check. And so after blocking the check, white took something with check. Why not? Exchange queens with check. Why not? Attack the rook and try to promote. Took here. Okay, so here with take, push, or sit, here white chose to capture, and this was great timing because black was trying to get over here to e6 to try to set up some sort of blockade. Now this pawn guards this square. So after capture, give me the rook, no, and then just simply capture, capture, and advance. And white's got a queen making factory, and here Timby resigned. So this was an excellent example of take, push, or sit by both sides, and or very instructive by both sides. All right, let's move on to PT, Pocket Thesaurus. Here's a game against a 2029 player, O'Kelly Sicilian. Okay, so this is pawn tension where the response is forced. Of course, everybody knows in the Sicilian defense when there's pawn tension between the C and D pawns, this is almost it's almost a forced move. If not, then the pawn will push by, and white will usually end up with a very good Benoni. So capturing, and this is kind of the point to black's first move, is to destroy white's two-pawn center when he creates it. So capture, capture, knight f6, knight c3, e5. So no pawn tension here. Not both sides just developing. PT won a pawn on c3, so is temporarily a pawn up. Castling is a little bit risky for black. So I guess that's white's compensation for the pawn. Okay, so queen d4, c3, and then here we have pawn tension. So we played about 10 or 15 moves where there was no pawn tension, and then suddenly white introduces pawn tension, and it turns out this is the key moment of the game, because when we go through the three options, we discover that, well, let's see, if capturing, then white could actually capture this with the queen, and white's pieces have improved somewhat. There's a nasty pin here. There is a triple attack on the A pawn, and white's starting to utilize their lead in development and the fact that black hasn't castled. If black chooses to push here, then after capturing, whichever way black captures back, both the C and the B files are open. And again, white is going to get some really good counterplay for the pawn that was sacrificed. So this means that black is basically forced to sit. But how do you sit here? Now, in the game, PT sat like this with rook to G8. Okay, so it's an aggressive move. We're aiming at the king. And, well, no, of course he didn't play G4. But okay, so this is how he sat. But unfortunately, by passing the responsibility to the opponent, white now won 2 pawns and ended up getting a big giant queenside attack, which is simply capturing, because black cannot capture back when the rook is unguarded. So this means that in this position, we need to find a good sitting move. And it turns out that the best way to sit is to play king up, which does slightly guard the king in this, this unusual looking fortress. But what it really does is it connects the rooks. So this way that if white chooses to take, black can take, and we don't lose a rook anymore. And we don't lose this pawn because it's defended. So this was the absolute key moment of the game. Rook to G8, and then white in take push sit chose to take, and this is just going to lead to a bunch of captures. Knight A7 was played, I guess desperately trying to guard the rook, but shield the rook from attack, but white just simply takes the second pawn. And now after queen to A1, good move. Black did introduce more pawn tension. And I think this is also instructive, because here, if white is a 98er and actually captures all the time, then whatever black captures back with might give some counterplay on G2. So white very wisely did not capture here and just simply attacked the knight. And now there's a very deadly pin and some under defensive. No, he didn't play rook to B8. So he played D4, creating a different pawn tension. So he actually chose to push and attack the rook. White took, black took, white just simply retreated the rook. And from this point forward, I don't think there was any pawn tension. PT went for a crazy attack here on the king and try to put some pieces over there. But unfortunately, it just became 2 queens versus a king. And the rest of this was, it just led to a forced mate. So this was a case where pawn tension ended up being the most critical moment of the game. And when handled incorrectly, you can see why this is actually an important thing to know. Okay, so here's another PT game where he tries out the London system. And here we have our first case of pawn tension. Okay, so here, if white captures, then this might lead to a couple of different adventures. Number one, black could just simply capture back with the knight, attack the bishop, and just have a really wonderfully placed knight. Also, there might be some possibility of black playing E5 followed by E4, which, I don't know if that's a good tactic or not, but it might be something that's in on the position. So taking is fraught with danger. If white pushes by, this removes the tension from the board, and it also makes it so that black's dark square bishop is suddenly a really excellent piece. So, and like I said, PT likes to sit usually with a pawn tension. So this move was not surprising. And here the tension remains, and here black got rid of it and then chose to attack with pieces, which PT now defends himself. Check, trades of queens, castle, castle, and then black introduces more pawn tension. Okay, so taking, pushing, or sitting. Well, here, if white takes, then these pawns are very weak and exposed and can easily be built up on with like some rook coming to c8. And black will have a weak pawn as well, unless black, of course, takes with the pawn. And then only white has pawn weaknesses. Pushing, same thing. It gives up the c5 square, and these pawns, there's a direct line to them by putting a rook on the c file at some point. So again, the correct answer is probably to sit. So PT does do this, attacks a pawn, which was defended, sits again, trying to build up. So this is what I mean about the tension building up in a game when you choose to sit. This one is threatening e4. So this means something has to be done. So he gets the knight out of the way. This might not stop like f4 or e4 or any of these type of moves, but at least he has a threat. So black now gets rid of the tension. He chooses to push. So he redirects the bishop, guards his pawn again, and sets up a threat which was ignored. Now here we'll have pawn tension, but this isn't real because the real target is the b6 knight. So, but it is check. So he has to get out of check, and then he takes the free knight. So now he has a winning attack. Now, and the way that he finishes off this attack is kind of cool because he uses pawn tension. G5, and here it is. So what he sees here is that G7 is only defended by the knight. So he uses his pawn to try to kick the knight away, but there's pawn tension in between. So here we took and white took, and now the knight must move or he has to sacrifice. So he chose the second option, check. Builds up on d5, couple of checks here, and then black introduces take, push, sit one more time. And here, PT chose the right option, which was to capture, because after capturing back, he just simply utilizes the G file, and there really is nothing more here, and black chose to resign. So this was an excellent use of take, push, sit by PT throughout the whole game. Okay, so a couple more here. Here's one more of Timberlake. We'll go back to Timberlake. Wait. We had pawn tension here. So this is a great way, by the way, to handle the f4 variation of the Sicilian defense. As a matter of fact, most f4 players like to preface it with knight c3. So this way, this square is guarded, and then you can play f4 on the next move. Every once in a while, though, a Sicilianista must go up against an f4 guy and or gal, and d5 is a great way to try to make f4 look a little overextended, I would say. No, they didn't play f5. But it does create take, push, or sit. So here, white chose to push. And I think here what probably is going to happen is some sort of really good version of the French defense for black by, like, say, bishop f5 followed by e6. And then just play it like a French, but with a better bishop. You could play it with like a French with e6 immediately. This should be okay. Very interesting move by Timby, pushing by, preventing d4, I guess. So we have some opposite side, not opposite side castling, but one where black is trying to set up queenside castling. No pawn tension yet. A couple of things exchanged. And then whammo, suddenly there is pawn tension. But this one looks really good for white, because whether black takes, pushes, or sits, I think white is going to get a good advantage here. Like taking looks insane because of knight takes. And now suddenly white's got a whole slew of goodies here to play for, and it just improves the knight. Let's see, pushing is out. And if you sit, then this is going to give the option to white of either capturing and bombarding the e6 square, or knight to h5, putting pressure and trying to make black castle on the king side, where all of a sudden an f6 might become a problem. So Timby at least tries to guard e6 frontally, but white takes anyway, take, push, sit. And this looks good for white with the weakness, the light square weaknesses and the lack of castle. Knight to d2, so he's going for this and also opening the f file. Knight e3, so Timby does have a monster knight. loses a pawn but gains it back, check, but loses castling rights. Okay, so here we have no pawn tension. And this usually happens in wide open positions. So this means it's a battle of big pieces rather than a battle of pawns. Okay, so here we have pawn tension, and I think this is a reasonable move, trying to break down the g4 pawn. And here white could probably choose all three options. Probably taking, pushing, or sitting is reasonable for white, although black has the extra exchange here. So then they create pawn tension, and because this is like double attacked, here capturing is probably a good move. And then we have something that we could pick on. So this is what Timby does. He picks on the weakness, nice in-between move, check, and then saving the other rook. And then he just simply exchanges down, and I don't think there was any more pawn tension, and Timby wins with his extra rook. All right, so the last game we'll look at here is a game of PT, where we have pawn tension now already on d4. And because d5 could again lead to a Benoni-ish type position, black could sit with castles. And if white chooses to play d5, then it's just the fianchetto variation of the Benoni. No big deal there. Here, PT chose to capture, which leads to the some sort of accelerated dragon. And okay, so no pawn tension here, nothing here. Both sides just moving their pieces around, castling, developing, trying to start some stuff. And then here black goes f5. So this makes pawn tension. And here, because the threat of pushing by is so great, which will attack some really important points, white probably should utilize this tension to capture and try to slow this down a little bit, and also make black take in some way where there's some sort of concession. Like, for example, if black takes with the rook, there's a fork. If black takes with the pawn, then the pawns are now hanging pawns, and the knight on h5 is a bit loose. If black takes with the bishop and attacks the queen, that's fine, but now the e5 pawn is now isolated. So white should actually have done that. White actually chose to get the rook off of the diagonal, but PT now it's his turn to take, push, or sit, and he finds push, which is very good move in this position, adding pressure here and trying to open the F file. Also, it opens up the bishop too, so it's just an all-around good move. Here, white, okay, so now it was white's turn with take, push, or sit, and white should definitely sit by moving the bishop, and then allow black whatever strategy they can actually think of. Here, white chose to become a 98er and take, but of course, after black takes, now all of a sudden there's disco powers on the queen, on the king here. And we're attacking the bishop. So suddenly PT has a winning position. And after exchange of bishops, by the way, f4 was check. So that's why he had to play king to g1. Pawn takes bishop. And okay, so here we have some pawn tension. And I like PT's next move. He chose to push because, white's got a preponderance of force on the queen side. PT doesn't want to trade pawns and make, like one move ago, if he starts trading things, then all of a sudden the knight improves, this battery improves, and even though black is up a piece, I mean, white still has some hope. By pushing by, however, the knight does not improve and has to retreat, and this battery on c1 and c2 is useless. So this is excellent play. We have a couple of scary moments here because white was allowed to invade, but we have an exchange of pieces, and then this trying to collect the pawn actually runs into this move, losing the knight. So we didn't have any pawn tension there, but PT has got himself a fairly reasonable rook endgame. Capture, capture, here, f4. Now, in this position, after here and king to g3, PT can use pawn tension even in this king and pawn endgame by simply playing G5. Now it's take, push, or sit. The responsibilities are given to white, but white has no good option here. If white chooses to sit, then black will just simply capture on F4 and then capture on E5. If white cannot push, and if white chooses to capture, you just simply capture the G5 pawn, walk over here to collect the E pawn, and then walk over and collect the queenside pawns, and that wins easily. There's no way that they could block all of that. So here, even in endgames, pawn tension is important. What is also important is the fact that PT played A6 here, which actually allows white one chance to play king to H4 and actually block the pawn tension, which will save him and make a draw. Unfortunately, white played king to H3, and then PT found the idea with G5, creating take, push, sit, forcing white to take the right pawn, and then go collect him, and the game is over, and black wins. So to wrap this up, this has been the take, push, sit lesson on pawn tension. Hopefully this has been instructional for you, and you can use this in your games. My name again is Coach Matt for the Seattle Chess School, and we shall see you guys on the next one.